Thank you, Rabbi Blazer. Rishus, the Rosh Kollel, Chavri HaKollel, and Kol HaKodesh Hazeh. It's a pleasure to be here. I had a very, very pleasant experience here. I've been in, I would say, a few other out-of-town communities. I don't know, I hope no one's insulted. I'm calling it out-of-town. But there's something special going on here. And I'm feeling very, the positivity, the Torah in the ear. It's really, really great. So it is a tremendous kavod to be here and discuss today's topic of verbal commitments and how it affects us. Now, of course, those who went through the Mar Mekaymis today are a bunch of steps ahead. But let's just back up. We know that commitments and halacha could be broken down into two categories. Ones that have kinyanim and those that don't have kinyanim. If you do a kinyan, such as writing a contract, such as maybe swiping a credit card, or other types of kinyanim, actually by a rental, starting the actual rental, that's one type of commitment where there's a kinyan, it's binding, there's no way out. Today we're not going to focus on those type of commitments. We're focusing solely on commitments that are just verbal. There is an in-between type of commitment that we're also just going to touch on briefly, which is when you gave money. When you gave money for a kinyan. And the halacha is that even though min ha-Torah, way we paskin, Ma'is is koinos, but Chazal said that Ma'is should not be koino. And therefore, Chazal tell us that even though you could back out when you gave money, you paid for something as a kinyan, but you have to be mekabel a klala. You have to go to Bais at different times, different places said the minig was to do it in the shul, berabim, and the Bais will declare that Pliny, you are hereby, since you're backing out, can be mekabel this klala of Misha Parah Ma'anshi Dor Hamabel, Dor Haflaga, and Anshi Sedoim, Va'amoyer, the one who paid and punished those societies that were not honest, will punish you as well for not following through. Now, today, I never heard of anyone willing to do that. So if anyone ever did a transaction where money was paid, usually they're going to follow through. No one in their right mind would take such a klala. I believe I heard that there was one time that I believe it happened for Shlomo Miller, but please don't quote me on this because I heard it secondhand or third hand, that one time they delivered a Misha Parah and within the year it was over. So there was no one to fight with anymore. So anyone with the right mind is not going to go ahead with this. So, but in our topic, verbal commitment, you do not have to be mekabel a klala. What do we have? The Chazal tell us, Ein ruach hachamin noicha yemenu. Someone who backs out of a verbal commitment, he's a mechusar amona. He's missing in his midah of loyalty. The amonis means he's loyal. He sticks by what he said. He's missing in that. Something wrong in that department. Ein ruach hachamin noicha yemenu. Chazal are not pleased with that. Now this is very ambiguous. What does it mean Chazal is not happy? You tell your child, Shlomo, I'm very not happy with you. You didn't clean up the toys. What does that mean? Most Achronim say what that means, in fact, is that it's an Issa D'Rabbanan. Almost all poskim say this. There is an Issa D'Rabbanan for someone to back out of their verbal commitments. It could be that it's a lower notch level of Issa D'Rabbanan. That's why it's classified as Ein Ruach Hachamin Noicha Yemenu, but it's an Issa D'Rabbanan nonetheless.
Achronim mean by every time they say, or in the context of verbal commitment?
Again?
Anytime Chazal say that lashon? Or the
Well,
same context
yes,
of-
many places go through every time that Chazal say it and they compare it and they say, yes, it's always an Issa D'Rabbanan. Yes, the Ranach has an extensive tshuva on that, but almost everybody. The Sabba Kadisha has a tshuva that says it's an Isser Chomer. Sounds like he's not going that it's maybe a level 2. He holds it's a real Isser D'Rabbanan.
Is this assuming that that when he backs out that nothing changed on the other side, or does he have his time?
Okay. Now let's get to, now that we know there's an Isser, you already bring up when don't we have the Isser? Okay, that's, now the fun begins. We have an Isser, what are the Heterim? Because, as we know, we're always constantly making verbal commitments, and are we always locked in for every single one? So let's go through the Heterim, and some Heterim first in the Gemara, those who saw the Maramukaimis today. First, okay, before we get to Heterim, just finish off with the Isser to know what we're talking about. If you did make a verbal commitment, the other party, if it'll take you to Bais, then Bais will say there's nothing we can do for you. However, what's the nafkamina from the other party? Number one is he could bear a grudge. It's really usher for someone to be a grudge al chaveroi for no reason. This is considered a valid reason for someone to be a grudge al chaveroi. Rabbi Yisrael Salanta famously said that every time that you find in the Gemara that yesh olav tarumis, it's a heter for someone to have tarumis. You find in the Gemara many places where the Gemara says you're allowed to have tarumis. Those are the places you're allowed to have tarumis. You're not allowed to have tarumis in any other place.
Tarumis means
Complaints.
Correct. This will be a heter.
Rabbi, what
This
is
is considered
tarumis?
valid reason. What?
What is tarumis?
Complaints.
Grudge.
A grudge.
Yes. I have a grudge. You did something wrong to me.
Yeah.
Can you tell
Another,
somebody else?
again,
Can you say Lashon Hara? Can you tell other
exactly.
people?
The next thing I was about to say, that you would be mutter to say Lashon Hara. Litoyeles, you can't just, not open, but I just, if it's going to be a toyeles, this is considered a valid toyeles that you could say, try to apply pressure on him that he should follow through with his commitment. The third, which is obvious, is that you are chayv to ask him mechila. You have to sit down with him and try to figure it out to make it work. That's what Mechusar Amana obligates us and allows the offended party to do. Now, before we start that term, Mechusar Amana applies across the board in almost every single type of verbal commitment, in every type of category. We're going to see at maybe the end of this year one class where perhaps not, but again, we're talking about any business deal. You promise someone a gift, you promise someone an employment, or an employee accepts employment. You tell your chavrusa, I'm coming today. You tell Rabbi Blezer that sure I'm going to come to the shir, etc. Now, of course, I just want to.
How about if you make reservations in a restaurant?
Why not? It will apply as well. Or you order from a caterer, same thing. Now,
Right.
What's the difference between a handshake, which is a policy versus a verbal commitment?
okay, once you do something called a situmta, then you go into the realm of a kinyan. Now, the word places that when they did a situmta, certain types of situmtas, it was considered enough of a kinyan to be a mishapar, which is another level, above level verbal commitment. But a handshake is already beyond verbal.
Can you define
Situmta is something that is considered a kinyan, in that the custom is that it should be binding. You do a certain action that it's considered binding. Now, if you're going to have a verbal commitment that's going to be binding, that's already a discussion in the poskim if you could have such a, in halacha would recognize a verbal commitment that could be binding. Marshall, in the diamond industry, famously, bracha v'hatzlacha amongst the, from a yidden, that was considered a verbal commitment and no one would back out of it. So there you would have that question, and they treated it over there as a done deal. So then, yes, maybe that would be a situmta. But generally, almost never do we view in a halacha as that a verbal commitment should be actually binding and enforceable beyond our sugya of mechusar amona. Okay.
Text messaging is not verbal.
Now, anything written is also verbal.
It's also.
And the poskim say if you write it, it's also considered verbal. Now, halacha will treat anything that's written also as a verbal commitment, even though it's not always clear when we do say everything. Like for Svir Saimer, do we say at the same time, could you write Svir Saimer, is that considered? Poskim mountain, then you get into it. But for this, the poskim say it is considered verbal, and that makes a lot of sense. Okay, now let's start with what we need and when we have mechusar. The first condition we need is we need smichas das. We need a level of seriousness of that we see that what you said you really meant. You meant to commit yourself. If there's going to be some sort of something in what you said that we're going to be able to see that maybe there's not 100% commitment to what you're saying, you won't have mechusar amana. Now, there are those who are going to say, and do say, that today words are cheap, and today whatever you're going to say, no one really believes you, no one really trusts you, and therefore there shouldn't be mechusar amana unless we know that this person is an honest guy and he follows through with all his commitment. Maybe, but Pashtus is we have Shulchan Aruch, we have Chazal, and they tell us what words. It's going to be very difficult for us to say on our own that today is different than the times of Chazal. In the times of Chazal, everyone was honest. And the truth is, if you think about it, people do rely on your commitments. What's the proof? The proof is when you back out, they're very upset. Why are they so upset? They never trusted you. The answer is that we do rely on people's commitments. And for us to say is that the level of commitment that Chazal needed to meet the threshold to cause a mechusar amana we don't have today, who is going to be a Navi to tell us what Chazal's? And almost all poskim say today, mechusar amana is relevant as much as it was at the time of Chazal. So for us to say, and throughout the entire sugi, and say, today it's different, and say that we don't have mechusar amana, we don't go like that. Our approach is that Chazal is true today just as it was in the times of the Gemara. But the condition is true. We do need a level of seriousness in his commitments in his dibur. And that does lead us to scenarios where we will not have mechusar amana. We need a commitment that is that we're actually committing. If you promise someone a deal, but you don't give him a price, or you don't tell him, you give him a price, but you don't actually tell him that you're actually going to give it to him. You say probably, most likely, 95%, 99%, but you leave that little window open, there's no mechusar amana, because there was no deal on the table. Anything that's a major factor in the deal that was left out, that was not discussed, could throw off the deal.
What about the other way around?
Bli neder is not going to be a heter. It just means there's no neder, but it means, but I did commit. If you said, bli mechusar amana, then the guy knows that, yes, you're not promising anything. You're saying, I'm promising you, but by the way, don't trust me.
Could you explain that bli neder part? If you tell someone bli neder, that is in essence nullifying it.
Bli neder is saying, I'm not making a neder, I'm giving it to you. But I never said bli mechusar amana. Mechusar amana is not a neder. It's a different sugya.
Does the mechusar amana apply to the lokeach also?
That's a tough one.
What?
The lokeach. Does it apply to the lokeach?
It applies to both parties, whether you're promising to buy it or whether you're promising to sell it to him. It applies to anyone who's committing any party in the deal. If you...
You're saying bli neder nowadays is considered a commitment?
That's a tough one.
That's
Bli
the
neder.
guy is telling you that.
Bli neder says, why people say bli neder?
Because they don't want to commit.
No, because they don't want to be stuck in hilchos neder. Because listen, even if you're going to have a heter,
They don't want to be stuck.
there's a whole slew of a heter. If you're going to have a neder, you're stuck, regardless if you have a heter of mechusar amana.
Yeah, but I'm saying when guys
If you don't have a heter,
say,
you're
I don't
not.
want to commit mechlal.
What?
Guys, he means
If
to
he
say, I don't want to
said,
commit
again,
mechlal.
I agree. If he says, listen, I'm going to give you a deal, but I'm not committed, fine, then you're good. but no one's going to be doing business with you. Right? So they won't take it the way it is. If you say bli neder, they'll do business. Why? Because they know you're committing, and you just say bli neder because, like you say, tzlach Rabbi, whatever. It's just that is Hashem. So that is Hashem, and you really think what you say. You say bli neder.
I don't know if I say to somebody, "Are you going to come learn the Kollel tonight?" Is it bli neder? Please no. So that's
In the context, in your line of work, a lot of things we know. That's why I listen to them. But
Another category of neder. Neder
Okay.
is one thing, and a deeper is another thing.
okay, listen. Okay, you know what? Maybe I'll take it back. Depends what if you can establish that bli neder means no, then okay, so you say no. The punishment Rav says I'll try means no also. You know, he used to come collect and he says I learned words in English that when I say I try, it means no. A different way of saying it. Good. So if bli neder means I'm not really committed, I'm just trying to get you off the back, then enechanam, you're masking. But you know, I don't know if I'll be so quick to say bli neder means no. I would take this seriously. But I should point out that when we're dealing with nedarim, when you commit something, let's say you commit a gift, to give a gift to an ani, already now we're dealing with a different sugi. We're not dealing with our sugi because we're dealing with nidreit tzedakah. Let's say there's a kollel, and the Rosh Kollel comes over to you and say, "Can I have a donation?" So he says, "Yes, I'll commit for $500,000, new building." Yeah. And then you say, "Oh well, I learned today, went to the share yesterday, and there's a whole slew of a term. I'm backing out. Sorry, no heter for that." Because now we're dealing with nidreit tzedakah. Nidreit tzedakah, you'll have to wait for the next speaker to come and give a term for that. I don't think Rabbi Blazer or Rabbi Singer are going to be inviting anyone on that topic. But point is that I'm only dealing with a specific cases. That's what we're dealing with. Once your case is going to get involved other sugyas, you're going to have to ask or figure out what the answer to that child is. But over here specifically, we're talking about verbal commitments where you're not going to have any other complications. Okay, so step one is it has to be a real commitment. If you leave the window open for any detail in the deal, there is no deal. Number one. The Gemara brings the second condition. The Gemara tells us, Chazal already tells us, that there are times when we see, Chazal could tell us that it wasn't really serious. And we don't really feel the commitment. And that's by Matan Maruba. Something that's classified as too large of a commitment, we don't take seriously. Why? There's no smichas das. Most Rishonim learn and Poskim learn, it means that the person, the beneficiary of this commitment, doesn't really take you seriously until he sees you actually perform.
Does it depend on the receiver or the giver? Let's say
So,
Bill Gates gives to the
excellent. Excellent point. So the Poskim say that it depends on the person who is the giver. Who's giving. Bill Gates says he's going to give $500,000.
You can trust
That's tissue paper. Because for him it's nothing.
Yeah.
So for him, I actually trust. But if I will promise that, no, there's no problem. I mean, otherwise, you know, we deal with nidreit tzedakah fine. But if I promise you $500,000, it means I can back out. I can back out. Al sasugi of Maysharim, because of course no one's going to take me seriously. Or even if I do take you seriously, but it doesn't have that level of seriousness that we need for the sugi of Maysharim to kick in. Chazal understand that when you do promise something that's above your not your ability, but above what people would normally expect you to do, they might take you seriously, but it doesn't reach that level of what they take you seriously that would Mechusar Manu would kick in.
Is that
Therefore, you could back out.
Is that with presents or any deal that's
Anything.
big risk?
Any deal. The Knesset Cheskel is mavur that let's say you promise you're a supplier and you promise a certain buyer of yours to give him a 25% discount, and that's a huge discount, and you're not going to make any money, then it would be considered matana meruba. So even in business deals, we would say if it's above and beyond what's expected. Now, of course, it depends on the scenario, because sometimes, let's say the season is over and you're trying to knock off the stock, people will take you seriously. It would make sense. So hakol lefia inyan, you can't make a blanket statement that no matter what, that applies across the board. It has to be considered. Having said that, Bais can say that what happens if you tell someone, I'm going to give you $500,000, you could trust me on this. I promise I'm following through. Your heter of Matana Meruba is out the window. And it's Pashut. And that's what the Erz Ruah says. The Erz Ruah and other places can say that's what the Tshuvas B'Tzel HaChochma. I think. He paskins like this, that you won't have the heter of Matana Meruba because people will take you 100% seriously, even if it's a Matana Meruba, because you're actually using terminology that would make anyone take you 100% seriously. You won't have that.
You should talk about a guy that can't fulfill his commitment to a deal. Don't you have a problem with not telling the truth?
You want to know when and what do you have the Isra of Sheker.
Right.
Okay.
You can't fulfill your obligations.
Okay, over here we're talking about, okay, I'm glad you brought this up. We're talking about over here where at the time of his commitment, he's serious. The person who's promising this gift and promising the deal wants to follow through. And therefore he means to tell the truth. And he is saying the truth. I want to do this and I'm going to do it. Then tomorrow I change my mind. So now we're not in the city of Sheker anymore. At the time of the promise, at the time when you committed to the deal, you didn't intend at all to follow through. You're just pushing him off, just telling him nonsense. That's true. There's an isser of shlo yidaber echad bepev echad b'leiv. You cannot express something or commit to something that you don't mean to follow through. That's 100% usser, and you're not going to have any heterim that we're going to have today. Perhaps there's other heterim for sheker. There's other problems of Gnevus Das many times. A whole different sugya and a whole different problem, and maybe a different time it will be addressed. But over here, we're explicitly talking about verbal commitments where at the time you meant to follow through. And then, are you bound by it or not? Because you want to change, you want to backtrack.
We haven't discussed or have it that the reason why I'm changing is because of outside circumstances.
Okay, we're going to get to it. Bez Hashem, Dayan's asking good, and we have to get the heterim. That will be under the Department of Heterim. We're going to get there. Bez Hashem. Let's go in order. Let's not jump ahead. A next heter, which is built on this idea that we need 100% commitment and people understanding, the recipient understanding and taking you seriously, is that the Rishonim say, Miri and others, and it's really built from the Gemara, that if the recipient knows that the person who's promising the deal, he has a boss, and he knows his boss is tough, and he knows that this boss is known to review what his people are doing, and sometimes pull the deal. And he knows that it's likely that this employee didn't check with his boss before he promised this deal. Or, you know that he didn't check with his wife. Or you know that the wife didn't check with the husband in some sort of order. There will not be Mechusar Amana because there's not 100%. Now, even if the wife himself decides on her own before she consulted with her husband to back out, there will not be Mechusar Amana. Because a person knows that it could always be pulled. You didn't. Now, had the wife said, I spoke to my husband and my husband told me I should do this, then there's going to be Mechusar Amana. But something where we know that there's a step missing here. It's not final. It could be pulled. There will not be Mechusar Amana there. Now, Hakol, of course, we can apply this liberally. Hakol Lafia Inyan. You have to examine each case and each circumstance by itself to see if we could use that heter. But again, all these heterim are all built on this one idea that in order for Mechusar Amana to kick in, we have to have a strong, solid, serious commitment on both sides. Let's move on to the next shlav of heterim. The next shlav of heterim, before we get to that, I want to be maktim. What is the yisoid of Mechusar Amana? Why should it be asr? This is an achloikus in the Rishonim. What's the idea behind not keeping and following through with your commitment? The pashtus is that it has to do with emes v'sheker. You said one thing, not following through is not being honest and truthful. And that's how Rabbi Yonah, I believe it was in the Mar Mekoimis, say, and many Rishonim learn that the Mekor from Mechusar Amana, you learn out from a pasuk in Sfanya, Sheretz Yisrael lo yasa avlo, v'lo yidaber chozov, v'lo yidaber chozov. Klal Yisrael, at the times of Mashiach, who will be the Klal Yisrael, they will be defined by people who do not speak falsely. And they understand chozov. Chazah means someone who promises something, and he means the promise, but he backtracks. So it has something to do with emes v'sheker. That's many Rishonim would learn. However, there's another camp in the Rishonim. The Yereim calls Mechusar Amana, he brings it. Where does he bring it? He doesn't bring it in any mitzvah or loisaseh of having to do with sheker. He brings it as a tolda de gezel. In the lav of Eloi Sigzil, he brings certain sub-topics that go into Gezel, and he says one of them is Mechusar Amona, Tolda de Gezel. Brings Mishapara, and he brings Mechusar Amona as a Tolda de Gezel. Taisus in Bava Basra and in Ksubis seems to learn that the idea of Mechusar Amona is that verbal commitment is not the way we initially would view it as just a verbal commitment. A verbal commitment actually is binding, except you could back out. In the world of Mechusar Amona, it really belongs to the recipient to a certain extent. It really is his. Just, you could pull it back. You have the right to pull it back. Chazal say it's us if you can do it, but you have the halachic right to undo it. But to a certain extent, the inyan, the halachas of Mechusar Amona already is as if it belongs to the recipient, the person you promised it to.
That's a shot and told of the Gezel?
And that would explain why it could be called Told the Gezel. Because to a certain extent, you're pulling something back that belongs to a certain extent to the recipient. Now, there's a big machlekes in the Rishonim in the next big heter. And the most common heter, which is called in halachic terminology, trei tari. In the times of the Gemara, what it means is, trei tari means a switch in price. Shar tari means shar, the price in the market price, and trei means two, meaning there was one price yesterday, and now today there's a second price. The situation changed and the price changed. So the Baal Amor, Rosh, the Tur, they all paskin that when there's a price change, you're allowed to back out you can back out of the commitment.
Either party.
The party that's losing, meaning the person who's gaining on it, there's no, for him it's not a change. Right? It's not considered a change. Now the reason why let's flush out the reason why should it be mutter the back out? So the basic there are a few understandings, but let's stick with the basic understanding why you should back out. Why should you back out? Why should you be off the back and when does it change? Hold on, what's the reason why you should be off the back out? So the basic understanding of it is when I committed yesterday, I committed for a certain set of circumstances, under a certain price, a certain market condition. Today, the situation is different. The conditions are different. Therefore, I never committed to this situation. Therefore, it's not like I'm backing out of my commitment, I was never committed. If the price will go back to the way it was yesterday, yes, now my verbal agreement will kick in. So therefore, hold on a second. Therefore, the understanding according to these poskim is that my verbal commitment yesterday will not apply for today. Most Rishonim hold that this will not be a heter. And we'll get to halacha l'maisa in a second, but Moshe in Igus Moshe explains that if you're gonna understand that Mechusar Amana is not just the emes v'sheker. It's as if it belongs already to the recipient. Very well that the price changed, the situation changed. But it changed when he already has it. He already changed after he owns it already. Why? You can't say that you didn't commit in this situation. It's already a done deal. It's as if you actually sold it. And now the price changed. Everyone understands you can't go back. Hey, by the way, I sold you something yesterday. The price changed, I want it back. Jump in the lake. It changed when it was already mine. So too, in the world of Mechusar Amana, says Rav Moshe, if we're going to say that it's as if it already belonged to the recipient, he's the one who gained on it. It changed while it was already his. So that would not be a reason that you should be able to back out. Now, getting to the halacha l'maisa on this, the Ramah actually paskins. He brings both days, at the end of Reish Tal, he brings both days, and he paskins l'chumra, that trei tari is not mutter. There's no heter of trei tari. Paskins like Rov Rishayim. And it's going to be very difficult for anyone to find in the basic Noisa Kalim someone who's going to be matir trei tari. However, Piskei Tshuva does bring a Chasam Sofer in Hilchas Milah, and there's a Taz in Hilchas Milah, and the minig became to be mekel in trei tari. Chasam Sofer clearly says trei tari is mutter, and he learns it into the Taz in Hilchas Milah that trei tari is mutter, and the established minig today, by almost all Poskim, is that trei tari in fact is mutter. So the standard psak you're going to have, that when you're dealing with a question of a circumstance changing, that it will be mutter. Now, of course, if you want to be machmer, tavi alecha bracha, and it's not just a chumrah, there's a really a good reasons to be machmer, and there's always a midas chasidus when we're dealing with verbal commitments, that no matter what to follow through. But you don't always have the liberty to be a chassid and do lifnim mishur sadin. Sometimes it's a matter of business. You have to do what the halacha allows you to do. And yes, trei tari will be mutter. Now let's examine trei tari.
Does that apply in an Anglo case? Does that svara that it was Rishus and Nisyaker kind of svara, does that apply in an Anglo case? If I promise to sell you something that I don't even have yet, are you telling me that
excellent point, which really what I was going to get to. Let me get to it now. There's a machlekes in the Rishonim. Big machlekes. Do we have mechusar amana? Where do we have mechusar amana? Do we have mechusar amana across the board, or the Rosh says in the Tshuva, you will not have mechusar amana in a case where you cannot actually make a kinyan on. We know that there are certain klolim and halacha things that you cannot make kinyanim on. Like you said, I don't have yet. Halacha does not allow you to sell something you do not own yet. It's a dav she'eni b'rishusay. You can only actually sell and make a transaction on something you actually own. You could be mechayiv yourself on something. You can obligate yourself to sell something, but you can't actually sell something that you don't own. Will mechusar amana work on such a scenario? So the Rosh says it will not. And the understanding is, it will not work. There will not be mechusar amana on something that you cannot actually make a transaction. Now, if you're going to learn that the idea of mechusar amana is actually as if you gave it, there's a certain transfer of rights with the verbal commitment, it makes a lot of sense what the Rosh is saying. Because mechusar amana is not just an emes, it's not an emes v'sheker thing that you could be called a liar on anything you say that's untrue. You could be gay in the meat of emes v'sheker and anything. But if you're dealing with a transactional right, something that you have to actually make a kinyan, you're giving over rights, we're dealing with much more than just the emes v'sheker. So the Rosh says that, yes, of course, mechusar amana, in the world of mechusar amana, there's some sort of kinyan transaction you're doing, but it's only something that if you would be able to do a real transaction, it will work. So now you have this quasi type of verbal transaction that we'll recognize in the world of mechusar amana, but it's only on those things.
That's all the Borough of Alma, but if someone gives money as well, even though it's...
Then you get into the world of Misha.
Even though it's not his Rishus.
Then you get into another machlekes. Does Misha Para work on something? That's a different discussion. Another machlekes Rishayin. And the level you want to know, Misha Para level. Because money only. If you do a different kinyan, that's another discussion. If you do it, what you're raising is probably what you mean to say is, what happens if no one commits, but they just make a kinyan? There's no verbal discussion, there's no negotiations. You go into the store and the guy makes a kinyan, straight up kinyan, that cannot work. Will that be also mechusar amana? Because it's in the kinyan, so like in the kinyan, the transaction you're doing, also a verbal commitment. That's also a discussion. Some achronim say that no, that when I do a kinyan, I don't mean to give you other verbal commitment. If this transaction could work, it'll work. If not, I'm done. I have no other strings attached. I'm trying to only do this kinyan. But okay, let's go back to our discussion here. So again, we have this another machlekes in the Rishonim that will be totally on that machlekes in the idea of what's behind mechusar amana. Is mechusar amana a emes v'sheker idea, or is mechusar amana more of a zela, more of a transactional type of binding commitment idea, and which will lead to this other machlekes. The Ramah in Hilchas Mila, which is discussing the idea that if you promise a moil that your child who was born or wasn't born yet, that he could be the moil, could you back out on that? So Ramah says it's usher to back out. For why? Because of our halacha. Everyone knows that when you use a moil once or twice, or once even, they say you should not change the moil. Where does that come from? Comes from the Ramah and Hilchas Mila. Where does that come from? From our sugya mechusar amana, that you cannot back out of a commitment. Why? Because when you use a moil once, actually it became even once, but once you use a moil regularly, it's understood that you're going to keep on using it. So there's an unspoken verbal commitment that you're always going to use it. So don't back out because of our sugya mechusar amana.
Even if we'll never know.
Correct.
You use Zimmerman once in Lakewood and you're never.
Correct.
There's 6,000 bricks in the day.
Now you're going to have to apply one of the heteros.
Does it apply to all services, the barber or anything?
Why not? If we're talking about Yidden, then yes.
Gar mitzvah is a bit of a neder. Barber is not a gar mitzvah.
No, we don't need a nether from Chasar.
One on hold on a gar mitzvah gets a bit of a neder.
Oh. Okay, you open up a can of worms. When do we say using someone regularly? When do we say using someone regularly, you're stuck with them? So again, there's a Chut Hashoni from Reb Nissim Kollel. He writes over there that the idea comes with Makir Kuhuna. That's really the idea what we're using here. The concept of Makir Kuhuna is when you use someone regularly, you're stuck. It's as if you committed to use it. He says that's only when you're using him, it's not because you happen to be using him, or he's the only guy in town. It's you're using him because you're choosing to use him because of your relationship with him. That's when we say you're stuck with him. Now, why by Moyelim it developed, like everyone knows, you have to know which way it started. Did it start because it's a Mefurish or Ramon, Shulchan Aruch, Memela, everyone knew that when you use a Moyel, you're stuck, and therefore, Moyelim expected it, so I know when you're using it that so became as if it's verbally committed, or for some reason Moyelim was different, but really, theoretically, it should be the same. And I believe that's the way what happened.
Why do I have
because
to think what the Moel thinks?
What?
Why do I have to think?
Because
what the Moel
it has nothing to do with what the Moel thinks. It's what's understood. What do people understand? Because we have a Ramah in Shulchan Aruch that says that when you use a Moel, it's usher, or when you promise a Moel, or even when you use him regularly, you're stuck with him. So people got the impression you use a Moel, you're stuck. So therefore, I know that the Moel is thinking, and if I don't dispel his thoughts, it's as if I'm agreeing with that. So you can't say, I'm thinking I'm not committing, but everyone understands I am, but I don't care what anyone thinks. No, your actions are speaking louder than what your thoughts are. And what happened before the Ramah? Good idea. I think before the Ramah, just 1 second. Before the Ramah, my theory is that people would be able to switch the Moel, and probably did. And it was only, earlier place can say that you had to use the Moel 3 times. What's regularly mean? Using it 3 times. Today, the Arpaisim will tell you even 1 time you use the Moel, you're stuck. Why? And even today, the Arpaisim will say only 3 times. The answer is that the person will say only 1 time, even 1 time you're stuck, is because people have no idea why the Ramah says what he says. and people have no idea anything about Mechusar Ramana. All they know is that there's a halacha in Shulchan Aruch Chos Mila that says that you're stuck with the mile. So I'm stuck. So I know when I'm committing the mile, I'm stuck. I'm stuck.
If I want to take a second mile, I have to ask the first one?
Again?
If I want to take the second mile, a different mile,
Yeah.
do I have to ask the first one?
You have to ask a shayla. You should ask a shayla.
You tell them I will.
It's too many details, but according, you'll have places that say that if you use one mile, you should use the second one again. You'll get that psak. Not everyone will pass like that, but you'll get that psak regularly. Someone was asking a question over this back then.
Is that for all professional services as well?
Again, Reb Nissen Krell says that it has to be that using him because of a business relationship.
Understood. So, and it's only the year, right? Understood.
Correct.
What's the head to the back out? Let's say he messes up.
Oh, okay. Messes up. That's another heter, which I was going to discuss afterwards. If he's no good, then there's a toy. Marshall. What happens if I committed and I had a certain... It's similar to trade tariff, but it's over here everyone will agree. If there's something in the deal that was unknown and there was a mistake, then even if I actually made a kinyan, there's a makach. Now obviously it has rules and when, and here it can't be you dreamt that, something's different. It has to be something that's real, that changed. If the guy messed up and he's not as professionally used to what he was, so deal's over. And even if I made a real kinyan, I could say I'm gonna call the deal.
Why isn't that ceremony only by you?
Why is it?
Yeah.
It's an Issa D'Rabbanan was only given to you. Oh, first of all, let's first of all, there's a Mefurish Gemara. There's a Mefurish Gemara in Bechiris, Daf Yud Gimel Amud Beis, towards the bottom, that says that Mechusar Mana does not apply to an agreement that a Yid has with a Goy. So, now, question is why. So the Gemara says that Goyim are not oimid b'diburayu. Therefore, there's no Mechusar Mana. Now, there's a lot of different ways of learning that Gemara, but we have a Gemara, so we don't have to go further. And the Paiskim, Marsham brings this Gemara in many places. But it is true, there are some Paiskim that you find that there is the concept of Mechusar Mana, even by a Goy, and you have to explain that those situations where that there was a... But generally, the understanding is there's no Mechusar Mana. Of course, that goes without saying. If there is going to be a Chilul Hashem, of course, you have to take that into consideration. You can't use
From that mark, you derive that anybody who you know, it doesn't really keep their word. So there's no Mechusar Mana.
There is a Meishav Halacha that wants to do that. He wants, that's the Israel Tauber from Zitzal, from Michel Leiro Muncie. He says that yes, if you have someone that you know he's dishonest, then the way he understood the Gemara is that a dishonest person believes that everyone else is also dishonest. And when you promise him something, he doesn't even listen. By him, words mean nothing. So when you tell him, again, you'll have the heter of no smichas das. Yeah. So
that doesn't work for sheker. In other words, a chronic liar doesn't get a Torah after lying 50 times.
Correct, and but even a chronic liar thinks he's telling the truth. You know that. A chronic liar, when he promises, he feels I'm going to follow through. He actually never ends up doing it. Meaning, a dishonest guy.
No Mechusar Ramona because the other guy knows not to believe it. But if the whole reason behind Mechusar Ramona is because it's a Maisa Sheker, so Maisa Sheker is a Maisa Sheker.
Now you're opening a can of worms. The question is, I would phrase the question a little differently. We know the Gemara says that if you don't have smichas das, there's no problem with Mechusar Ramona. So, if the idea of Mechusar Ramona is emes v'sheker, who cares if the recipient has smichas das? On your end, aren't you locked in with emes v'sheker? But it seems clear from the Gemara that yes, but the emes v'sheker is not just emes v'sheker. Sometimes it's a mitzvah to lie, right? That we do know. Sometimes emes v'amita is you have to be Michel Mipnei Hasholem. You have to sometimes tell the untruth. So therefore, in the entire world, saying the truth is not always by saying the truth. So over here, the Gemara is clearly telling us that a caveat for what we're calling truth over here is that there has to be a smichas das on his end. But again, we could discuss this more, and I'm not saying that I myself understand it 100% either. But it's a great question. But
someone's not from.
But one second, before I just want to finish. Give more. Let's define trade tari better? Because that's the most common heter people look for. Let's just define it a drop like this. Trade tari, even though the Gemara is referring to a price change, but the Chassam Sofer and other poskim are clear. We're not only talking about a price change, we're talking about any time there's a significant change in the situation, in any situation. Whether you had a deal and you promised a car deal that you're going to buy a car from him, and then someone gave you a car. I have no use to buy a car anymore. Situation changed. You'll have a situation of trade tari. The Shevet HaLevi says that that the price changes in such a way, in such a fashion that it's no one in the right mind would have ever dreamt that the price would shoot up that much. So unexpected. There are a lot of things that, like due to COVID, like markets and construction, etc. Prices shot up. No one cholam that such a thing would happen. Says the Shevet HaLevi, that's beyond the realm of trade tari. We're not dealing with the head of trade tari anymore. Everyone is going to agree that it's mutter. Everyone is going to agree that muchusar amon. Now, if you're dealing with a real kinyan, perhaps is what to discuss outside this, but that's not for today. If we're going to be dealing with a minute change, I'm going to say, hey, listen, the price changed by 2 cents. That's not, Kuli Alma is going to say that's not a trade tariff. Why? It's because when we look at the transaction, we see there's no difference whether you're selling $7 a unit or you're selling 7.2 cents a unit. It's the same deal. It's the same deal.
Who determines that though?
Us. What we would, when we look, you ask 10 people or 5 people, and I will tell you it's the same. That's a non-issue. That one sentence.
There's always a range that's going to be in question. So
correct. And that range in question is the machloikis of trade tari. When we have something is significant, it's not crazy. We could have entertained it. The prices in the market do go up and down occasionally. It was unexpected, okay? There we are going to have the machlokes of trade tari, and again, the most common psak you're going to get that trade tari is mutter. I just want to say one more point. That if we're talking about a change that's expected, we know the market is going up. We know the market is or we know it's very likely the market's going up, and we go into the deal, that goes into your verbal commitment, because the situation right now is that we know that the time when I deliver the product to you, the price is already going to be changed, or very, very likely it's going to be changed. So what am I committing? I'm committing in that circumstance, when I deliver the price is higher, I'm committing that I'm going to be delivering with our committed price. So that calls that achnis into your commitment. This is what I'm committing for. That even when it does change, this is going to be the price. You could protect yourself, of course. You could always say, listen, right now I'm willing to offer you the price, but it's subject to market price change and fluctuations, which you're fine. You could do that, and you should do that. Why not? You save yourself a lot of headache. But if you don't do that, and the price is very likely to change, and that's what everyone's talking about, how the prices are going to shoot up, then what does go up is now. If it goes up, but it goes up much higher what everyone was expecting, we're back to the sugya of trade tire. That extra amount of what we told.
What if the drastic change was a personal case, like when you got the car, where nobody expected that?
Very good point. That will also be trade tire. However, it has to be something where everyone will recognize that that's a valid reason for you to be a change. Now, what happens? Not everyone recognizes. Michel, I committed to buy a car, and it's my second car, and now I want to back out. Why? Because I'm saying, listen, I needed the second car really to go shopping, and now I'm all opened up, 2 minutes away, walking distance. I don't need a second car to go shopping. Now, very nice. You bought the car because you wanted to go shopping. But that's not why people always buy cars. It's very likely people need cars to just get around for 100 other things. So there, we would say there's no anan sahadi that this is a valid reason to make the situation change. However, what happens if you're buying a car to commute to work? And now you got a different job. All of a sudden, your boss let you know they're opening up an office down the block, and you don't need the car to commute. Now, commuting to work is a very valid reason why someone's going to buy his car, just for that reason. So, if we're dealing with such a type of change, where the seller and everyone else who hears this excuse understands, yes, this is a reason that it's a deal breaker that could change the situation, then yes, we will take it. But it's only because I'm telling you that the reason why I bought the car is because I had a dream last night that I should buy a car, and that's why I committed. And tonight and today I dreamt that I shouldn't buy the car, and that's why I'm canceling. Say hatzlacha. You know, that's not reason people don't buy cars.
Money change. None of that works with money change.
Yes.
This is just a verbal agreement.
This is only, again, we're only discussing these haterim, we're only discussing verbal commitments, only mechusar money.
What if it's different, like a life cycle event? Instead of like you inherited a car, but you have to go take care of your mom, and you just can't go through this purchase because it's just too much gas to do. And it's another.
Okay, that's very specific case oriented. You're gonna have to.
It's a different life cycle event that would disturb.
Maybe, I don't know. You're gonna have to take each case on its own. It's hard to give it generalize, but maybe.
Is it the same as walking into a store and asking for a price of a specific item, but not actually?
No, that's different because I'm not committing to anything. Like again, that goes to the very first caveat that we get. We need to have a deal. There's a different problem that the Mishnah in Bais says that goes into Dvarim. That when you walk into a store, the hope of the owner is like, well, Baruch Hashem, I have another customer or potential customer. Then you walk out empty-handed, his heart drops. And if you only walked in without intending to buy anything, so you're putting him through that letdown for no reason. You shouldn't do that. However, if you really want to buy something, you walk in and his price is too high, by all means, you're allowed to walk out. I didn't do anything wrong. Let him drop his prices and not his heart, and then it'll be fine.
You can get out of these cases by just writing duch with him before. You can just say, I'm coming, or you tell the mile, I'm only taking you for this once.
100%. And of course...
But no one knows that. The whole shot is for everyone else.
No, for you personally. For you personally. If you want to protect yourself, how does a person protect himself from a chasr money? He should always either tell him, listen, I'm very interested, but I'm not 100% there. I'm not 100% there. You're leaving the window open. You should never be, today it's the style to be, yeah, I'm good for this. We're doing this. We're gonna go. We have this. We got, how the slang and everything. We all want to be geschmack and we want to be positive when everything is good. But we're doing a lot of times in other people's cheshbainis, and people take you seriously. Don't do that. Say, listen, I want to do this, but listen, understand me, I'm 95% there, we still got to work some, but I believe we could do this, and we're going to do it. You can be positive, but make sure that you leave that window open, and the guy knows that you have that area where you're unsure and you might want to back out. Don't, promise something that you actually might have to back out. Now, just to conclude, this one thought, walkaway point. As I mentioned earlier, that Mechusar Amona means the idea that Chazal see in people who back out of the words, a chisar in the midah of loyalty. And as I mentioned, many Rishonim say the Mekor for this is from Sheretz Yisrael, Lo Yasa Avlo, Lo Yidaber Chazov. That Klal Yisrael, the Pasuk in Sfani, is describing what Klal Yisrael looked like, is going to look like after Mashiach comes. The remnant of Klal Yisrael, what are they going to look like? So they're going to look like people. Lo Yasa Avla, they're not going to do any harm to anyone. Lo Yidaber Chazov. They're going to be committed people to what they hold. Meaning, they're going to be loyal people in the midah of loyalty. Now we all get inspired. All of us get inspired. We want to conquer the world. We want to learn Shas. We want to learn Yushalmi. We start new initiatives. But what happens? Eventually, it peters out. Why does that happen? We make Kabbalah every Rosh Hashanah. It peters out because it has to do with the midah of Amona, the midah of steadfastness, the midah of commitment. In order to follow through, Chazal sees that this is such an important midah that they thought they had to even make an Isser Rabbanan for people to teach Klal Yisrael that they should work on this midah. And in fact, this is so important. This is gonna bring Mashiach. This is what the pasuk is saying. This is one of the midas that we're gonna need, and we understand it. So, because Rabbanan is not just a transactional Isser Rabbanan. This is something that goes into the midah, and perhaps that's why Chazal don't say it's Aser la'odem la'achlai. They don't say that. They say this is mechusar amana. This is something that in Ruach Chacham Noichei Menu. It could be very well be Chazal never made a new Isser of Mechusar Amana like they made an Isser on Muksa and Shabbos. It's very well Chazal pointing out to us that to be a Yid, you have to have that midah of loyalty, that midah of Nemonis. And if you don't have that, it's Asr intrinsically. We don't have to say, we're just pointing it out to you that it's not something that you should be doing, that a Yid could be doing. This is not who a Yid is, who a Yid could be. So when we say that it's an Isser D'Rabbanan, it's likely it's a class B Isser. But it's really could be even more and much more serious than a regular Isser D'Rabbanan. It might go into Hilchas Midas, like we know Derech Eretz, Kod Mulatar. This is what the nature of what a Yid is and what we have to have. We should all be Zaycha to actually be by Mashiach's times and be able to work on these midas properly, and we should all have hatzlacha and bracha in business.
Amen.